Characters beyond the meanings that we really associate with them.
You want to see what happening here?
And so I wrote the play, and I went to the Best Village with it. And we did it at the Creative Arts Center for preliminaries, and then bus real hard. This was a big play. Yeah, it was a lot to try to do on stage, and it called for a lot of resources. If you could imagine using all these carnival characters and stuff, it required, resources that I didn't have at the time. That's the try. But out of that experience, it stuck with me that this to me was what I needed, what I wanted as a child. The opportunity to see more of myself. Yeah? To see culture and forms and people and things that connect and speak to me. So I decided, what, I can't even write it. My first love is reading. I need to write a book. I'm going to take this play and I'm going to write a book. So when I finished my degree, I decided I was going to do a master's in creative writing to write this book. And the first chapter in the book bust. I remember, I'll never forget the first chapter in the book. When I handed it to my lecturers and I read it, I was like, this one chapter is about 8 chapters in the actual story. You need to take your time. It's not a play. It's a different form. You need to take your time, tell the story. And that was in 2009. Over the next, how many years? 11, 12 years was the process of writing this book. I took 4 years to do my master's, and this was my submission. And then, thank you. And then the next 2 years was the actual work, which was the editing and the polishing and the sharpening and the, And now that I was outside of the academic sector, I could really pay attention to the work, and I started back reading, and I took the time to really create this work, right? But I created it because of that need. And that's really what I want to talk to you all about. That's really what I want you to take away today. Yeah? How important it is that we see ourselves. How important it is that we support and we allow ourselves to be creative and use our traditional forms, our Trinbago forms and culture, our African forms and culture. Is very important because it can do so much for us as well as the persons who interact with our work. Because after 11 years of writing this novel, after how many years of participating in Best Village Drama Festival, learning about cultural forms, I found myself reading white. And when I say reading white, is that for all of my knowledge and for all of my understanding, I, about 2 or 3 years ago, noticed that when I pick up a book, even if the book expressly said that it was a black character that I was reading, even when the language tried to be Creole, right? Or some form of dialect, I would find myself seeing blonde hair and blue eyes. I should not hear what I'm saying, in spite of all of my knowledge and everything. And in reading, I found myself reverting to a character that had blonde hair and blue eyes. It was so difficult for me to see African people, to see the skin color in my mind. The skin color I'm surrounded by every day. And that is the importance of creativity and imagination and utilizing our forms and our culture through storytelling, or through any form of creativity that allows us to see us. And we know that is one of the biggest problems that we have in society today. Bringing up our young people, they're not seeing themselves. How many, and I'm sure there are plenty, parents, grandparents who hear, who have either grandchildren or no children, and you hear them talking and they're sounding American. They're talking with an accent. No, mommy, in Trinidad. So it's that desire that led to me wanting to write the book. And even when I wrote the book and then I gave it to people to read, I saw the reality of that. There was one person I gave the book to read and they spoke about the imagery, right? And all the botany, the flowers and plants and stuff. And like, you know, I realized when they make up, you know, these really nice plants, like this flamboyant. I was like, flamboyant is a real plant. It's a real flower. It's a tree. It's very real. And so the book is written with us. Yeah? Names of animals like quail. They didn't know what quail was. It's like, what's a quail? You know? So I sat and I saw people interacting with this work and learning things about Trinidad and Tobago, mature people that they didn't know. Yeah? I saw people learning about, of course, the carnival and the folk characters. I remember I did an interview, and in the interview, after I read the chapter, the speaker told me how brave it was. Because in the novel, the magic system that I use, this force that permeates the entire world, I call it Obia. And if you understand what Obia is in the African tradition and religion, Obia is the ability to do work. It is neither good nor evil. It is. It's a knife. It's a tool. It is something that can be used for good. It is something that can be used for ill. But it is neither in and of itself. It depends on the person. And he said that was brave to include it in the novel. You know, because I turned to African spirituality and religion as the underpinning belief system for these people who are we in the novel. But you know what, he was right, it was brave. Because when I was writing this novel, one of the things that I also did was I tried to use as much of our language as possible. So there's a character, this group of characters in the book called Kokono, which is mirrored off of the Red Indian mask, a traditional mask in Trinidad and Tobago. I decided the parallel I will draw with these Kokono is with our First Peoples. Because of course traditionally our First People played that mask a lot. Because they were essentially kind of playing themselves in the carnival. So like any good fantasy world, I wanted a language for these people. I decided, you know what, how can I now try to make up a language, and the First Peoples have so many rich languages in existence. So I decided I'm not going to try to make up a language, I'm going to try to find words and phrases and utilize one of the First Peoples' language. So I made calls and I got in touch with people. And I got onto the Santa Rosa First Peoples community, and they put me in touch with our group in Jamaica. And I got on the phone and I called them and I started the conversation. Hi, good evening, thanks for taking the call. No problem, X, Y, and Z. So this person put me on to you. I'm trying to get some language, some words, phrases, you know, in our first people language. The name of the book, this is what the book is about. I take our Caribbean folk and carnival characters and put it in their own world of magic, and the magic system that I used was Obia, and the phone went silent. I said Obia, and the person went silent. I can't help you, we don't want anything to do with Obia. We work real hard to distance ourselves from those types of things. So we don't want nothing to do with that. And that was the end of the phone call. That was the end of the phone call. And that's why I'm here talking about this today. The lack of self-love and caring and appreciation for what is ours. For the rich culture and heritage and religions that we have. The pains that were taken by the colonial masters to beat it and legalize it out of us. And now the laws have been repealed, but we are still distant from it. We still don't pay it any mind. We still don't try to understand. And try to understand that when our Orisha Ifa practitioner goes in their sacred space, they are doing the same things that the Catholics do and the Hindus do. They pray to their own gods and their own spirits and ask for intercession, positively or negatively, and that's not demonized. I'm an Anglican. And when I started to learn, one of the first things that popped into my mind is, but wait, we don't sit down in the Catholic Church and people just come and talk in tongues. And then just invite the Spirit of the Holy Ghost and whatever it is that he's saying, and talk in tongues. So how that different from when a parley, a spirit comes to someone and they speak and give a message in English? I don't know. So, all of that to say, how important I believe it is, and we should see it, to tell our stories, utilizing our cultural forms and our Trinbago forms, our African forms and heritage. Is important. It's important for us, and it's important for the next generation. Because if we don't start to tell these stories, if we're not comfortable to unleash our creativity and our imagination and use the things that are essentially and integrally a part of us, we'll lose it. And we'll lose ourselves. Thank you very much, everyone.
So we give a round of applause again to Mr. Keon Francis, first speaker. And we follow studio along right behind him with Mr. Shobaka Kambo. I don't think you need to have much introduction because when you hear the last name, you're supposed to know, yes? You're supposed to know, yes? So put your hands together and welcome Mr. Shobaka Kambo with his presentation.
Good night, brothers and sisters.
Good evening.
I'm a child of the revolution, and we only know one way to start a presentation, especially in here, which is where I would have come as a child, the same age as this young man here, for all kinds of heavy groundings with brothers and sisters. So, power to the people. Wait, no, wait, we forget. When I say power to the people, you say power. As the response, the call and response, alright? Power to the people!
Power!
Power to the people!
Power!
Power to the people!
Power!
Alright, that is the goal that we continue to work with as a people, coming out of our colonial experience. Tonight, first of all, let me congratulate my brother here on his discourse, on his book, publishing his book. Let's give him another round of applause. On his discourse, on what he revealed tonight about the Caribbean imagination, how colonized our imagination is. You know, and each of us, in some way, is colonized even inside our imagination. Of course, I am these days working on decolonizing our public spaces, but ultimately, it is us that need to be decolonized. And of course, on my right here is another great brother. We can't have him in our presence and not salute him, one of the hardest working activists or advocates for improvement in the lives of African people in this country, Brother David Mohammed. Let's give him a round of applause. So we're in good hands this evening. So they asked me to speak about the role of historical monuments in post-colonial society. We're not going to make that boring, we're going to get into some exciting stuff. Let me start by saying that the preferred narrative of race in our history is one that minimizes the harm done to African people, overstates European virtue, and hides structural racism, allowing it to have an insidious effect on the outcomes of our people up to today and into the foreseeable future. So what am I saying? That young man there is already a victim of structural racism. And I bet you I can inquire and show you how. And he'll continue to be until he is well into going into employment, going into marriage, etc., etc. Because we haven't addressed properly our history. That's why our motto is confronting the past to free the future. But I'm going to get into a little bit more detail. So what role do historical monuments play in all of this? Well, they are the tangible expression of the moral universe which created this reality. And they have agency, they literally act to uphold the values of those who created them and to put forward those values. So tonight what I'm going to do is contrast the colonial settler emancipation that we experienced and how our ancestors saw emancipation. First time I'm ever going to share this information publicly. Slavery is an evil of the first magnitude. Those men that are procurers and holders of slaves are the greatest villains in the world. If a man have not love in his heart for his fellow creatures, all his other virtues are not worth a straw. This statement comes from the writings of the great African abolitionist Ottobah Cugoano, a leader of a group called the Sons of Africa, a seminal abolition society in England founded in 1766, a year before the famous Society for Effecting the Gradual Abolition of the Slave Trade that they will teach your son about in schools. Cugoano and other activists in the Sons of Africa, like Mary Prince and Oluda Equiano, had the direct experience of slavery in the Caribbean. Note how Cugoano describes slavery as an evil of the first magnitude. It will be important later on. How he describes enslavers as the greatest villains in the world. The arguments of our African abolitionist ancestors differed significantly from the mainstream white elite abolitionists like William Wilberforce, Granville Sharp, and Thomas Clarkson that they will teach these young kids about when they go to school. This first point, The first abolitionist society in England was the Sons of Africa. All the members of that were Africans like you and me. The European elites formed their society based on what they saw us doing. And they're going to teach your kids about them and not about us. Start there. So while the mainstream white abolitionists saw emancipation as a future ideal in the 1780s, they insisted, our ancestors, on immediate emancipation. And we also, most importantly, saw it as fundamental to have reparations as the moral thing to do. This is in the 1780s. Yes, as far back as the 1780s, we were demanding reparatory justice. Cugoano spoke of reparations and restitution, that's his language, as a key feature of a just emancipation. He argued that even if the enslaved caught their former masters and treated them in the same manner, it would make no reparations and restitution for the injuries which we had received. There needed to be reparations, which would be a deliverance and protection for ourselves. Cugoano's writings frame enslavement as a grave infringement on the relations between human beings, as an abominable form of robbery, where people were robbed of themselves, a crime for which slave owners would have to repent and reform their lives. He saw rebellion as sacred and observed that it was the duty of the man who was robbed in that manner to get out of the hand of the enslaver. Revolution, he said, was the natural right and indeed the grand duty of the colonized. He advocated for compensation for the crime of slavery, calling for a generous encouragement to be given to African people at emancipation. Cugoano, like Oluda Equiano, I'm going to call the names of some of our great ancestors who fought for these values: Mary Prince, Phyllis Wheatley, William Davidson, Robert Wedderburn, just to name a few, along with one or two white radical abolitionists who also do not get named in your textbooks. People like Elizabeth Herrick conjured a different moral universe from the one formulated by white upper-class abolitionists. It was abolition based on natural equity and human rights instead of the property claims of slave owners. Here are some of the points. Immediate emancipation, recognition of slavery as a crime of the first magnitude, designation of days of mourning to commemorate the harm committed and the horrible injury of making merchandise of us. And just to give you a sense of how forward thinking that was, we had Emancipation Day proclaimed in 1984 in Trinidad, and then officially first Emancipation Day in this country was 1985. Oluda Equiano and these guys were talking about days like that back in the 1780s. It took us all that time to get that done, and we have so much more to do. He talked about free education for all those under slavery who had been deprived of the right to read and write. The elimination of all forms of ethnophobia in everyday life, and a guarantee of autonomous land. My brother David has been talking about land for the longest while. We need to have land as a people. Without land, freedom loses a lot of its value. To put things in some perspective, Cugoano died in 1791, the year that William Wilberforce first put forth a parliamentary bill calling for the abolition of the slave trade. So he died in 1791 calling for immediate emancipation. But it wouldn't be another 30 years before Wilberforce and they finally started talking about emancipation. Yet they are the heroes that your kids are offered, and not Cugoano and Equiano. 1971 was also significant for another reason. It was the first year of the Haitian Revolution, whose victory would give some expression to the great emancipation's ideas. Only in revolutionary Haiti did abolition erupt without measures or acts friendly to slave owners. but through articles of liberation that held that slave masters were accountable as perpetrators of crimes. From the Constitution of 1801, still promulgated under the name of Saint Domingue, to the subsequent ones after 1804 under the revolutionary and historical name of Haiti, all developed from the perspective of African persons as an equal part of the human family. There was no indemnity for property loss to whites, no apprenticeship or phase-outs for blacks, no regime of disadvantage to maintain the status quo for blacks and to civilize us, and no special legal privileges for whites to follow thereafter. Now let us contrast this just emancipation articulated by our ancestors with white settler-led emancipation that took place in the 1830s. In their emancipation, the one that we actually endured, the perpetrators of slavery, the people who owned and controlled the trade in human flesh, were allowed to direct and shape the process and to secure their interests. Through careful and strategic planning, they oversaw the design and implementation of laws, policies, and institutions that incarcerated, deported, indebted, brainwashed, and generally extended the subordination of Africans under white supremacist rule and the exploitation of African labor and anti-blackness into the foreseeable future. And my brother David Mohammed gives on his radio programs and in his lectures details of those laws and policies. And some of those institutions, like the curriculum of our children have to learn, are still in place today. One of the interesting institutions that was put in place at that point was the police service. We didn't have a police force until 1833. Just on the eve of emancipation, they created the TTPS. The very first act that the TTPS was required to carry out was to leave their 8 precincts, and the first 8 precincts are still the precincts in the country today, and to destroy any plots of land that our ancestors were planting anywhere, so we could chase them back to the plantation. That's the first act of the TTPS. They were never meant to police the elite, which is why today you find that they can't find a big fish. That was not their job. They were set up to police us. Right? The Abolition Act of 1833 represented an utter erasure of our humanity, while it honored and upheld the rights of colonizers over us as property. 37 of the 66 paragraphs of the Act, more than half, are concerned not with freedom, but the financial arrangements for compensating them for their loss in us as property. All told, property claims on more than 800,000 people were reconfigured into £20 million, 40% of Britain's national budget at the time, and distributed to 44,441 slave owners. The good thing is that today we know their names, right? Up until a few years ago, their children went to school with our children, right? We went to buy from their stores. We didn't know who they were. The playing field is now becoming level. Right, David? Right, Brother David? We know, and David knows this. Whenever you go to buy from Massey stores, you're buying from somebody who received compensation instead. All those businesses are from that compensation. Right? We talk more about that another time. To pay this enormous sum of money, the government issued bonds, which we now know took 180 years to pay off. The significance of this is that even as each generation of Africans was told, like us, to move on from the crime of slavery, some of us, those in the Caribbean diaspora, in the UK in particular, were co-opted secretly into paying slave owner reparations up until 2015. You hear what I'm telling you? Up until 2015, our people, through our taxes in the UK, those who went on the Windrush, were paid slave owner reparations while we were being told to move on. We only found out about this through a tweet from the British government's treasury posted on its official channel on February 9, 2018. The tweet, which was shared with the HM's Treasury 318,000 followers, simply read, "Millions of you helped end the slave trade through your taxes." Caribbean people were disgusted. Sir Hilary Beckles, who is in charge of the region's effort to secure reparatory justice, was quick to point out that this fact made slavery a present-day issue. Because, of course, when you're fighting for reparations, they tell you slavery is a long time in the past. But we pay in reparations till 2015 secretly. That makes slavery a present-day issue. By his calculation, the 20 million pounds in 1835 would be valued at approximately 15 billion pounds today. Additionally, he explained, the total amount that was to be paid for the abolition of slavery was actually 47 million pounds. This is because the British Parliament did not only pay 20 million in cash to the plantation owners, they also stipulated that we, our ancestors, should work for an additional 6 years for free under the apprenticeship scheme to pay off the balance of the 27 million pound balance. This meant that our ancestors, and not the British Parliament, paid the majority of the money for their freedom. So just like they made the Haitians do, the French, they made them pay for their freedom, not the great revolutionary leaders like Toussaint and Dessalines and they, but the weak ones that followed, they forced them to pay for their freedom. We did the same thing. In other parts, that was part of the white settler colonial emancipation process. Not the process we envisioned, but their process. For the unjust provisions that cast the enslavers as our liberators, and justly aggrieved property owners, and our ancestors as legitimate property or chattel, the Abolition Act of 1833 has been characterized by Sir Hilary Beckles as the most vile and racist piece of legislation in the history of mankind. So our most distinguished historian has described it as the most vile and racist piece of legislation in the history of mankind. A view shared by other prominent Caribbean historians, including Dr. Claudius Fergus and the late Anthony Martin, both from Trinidad. But things would get worse before they got better. And remember, what I'm addressing here is the moral universe in which our slave masters could be honored on our streets and our plazas and our squares and our statues. Things would get worse. By 1900, when the great Trinidadian barrister Henry Sylvester Williams organized the first Pan-African conference in London that brought together people from across the world to, in his own words, deliberate solemnly upon the present situation and outlook of the darker races of mankind. An idea had taken root that non-white peoples were genetically and immutably inferior. And like poorly constituted fauna, that is animals, in the natural process of dying out or going extinct in the face of the superior race. So 50 years after slavery, we have an idea in our minds of linear progress. That's how we're taught history. So every 10 years we make a move forward, 50 years after slavery, the new idea had taken root, which was worse than the ideas that were in slavery. By the way, Henry Sylvester Williams, he had a house. He lived in Trinidad in Aruca, just on the edge of the bus route. And a few years ago, we started a campaign to save his house. Now, you know, in Trinidad, they have these organizations dedicated to preserving our heritage. So every time there's some old colonial structure somewhere that was owned by some planter or something they built, even a slab of cement where they were buried, that's something they want to preserve. They destroyed Henry Sylvester Williams' house just a few years ago. And today, the site of that historical building, that foreigners, we didn't know about it, but foreigners used to come here and go to that building and take pictures. That site is now an unremarkable car wash on the edge of the bus route. If you go into the Lopino community, as you cross, just before you cross the bus route on your left-hand side, that car wash there is where Henry Sylvester Williams lived. And we destroyed it, his house. And I'll give you the story. when the bulldozers and they reached, an old lady next door, she stopped them and she said, hey, somebody important used to live there. She didn't know who. They say, what do you mean, Tanti? She said, well, people come here all the time, foreigners, white people, tourists, and they take pictures there. They say, Tanti, that place old and nothing significant, and they bulldoze the place, even though she told them that it was a bad idea. So, at the time this idea took over, that we were inferior, and we were going to go extinct, we were going to go extinct anyway in the face of the superior race. And so it was felt that because this was inevitable, it was acceptable to help us go extinct. The Prime Minister of England, Lord Salisbury, expressed this best in his famous speech in Albert Hall in 1898. One can roughly divide, I'm going to say his words, the nations of the world into the living and the dying. The weak nations become increasingly weaker and the strong stronger. It was, he said, in the nature of things that the living nations would fraudulently encroach on the territory of the dying. Now, that science that he was referring to was called eugenics. Here in South, we have a library named after a man called Carnegie Library. Everybody know that library? Carnegie was the greatest sponsor of the science of eugenics of the 20th century, the greatest in the United States of America. Eugenics is divided into two segments, positive and negative eugenics. In positive eugenics, the idea was to create conditions under which what they call the superior races could thrive and increase in number. Negative eugenics was to create conditions under which the inferior races, our ancestors, would die out and be forced to the margins of the society. They considered us not to have what they call developmental or civilizational capacity. The legendary thinkers, now you know what goes around comes around. And so this horrible science, which did kill many of our people all over the world, I don't have time to go into the details, it came back to the Europeans in the 1940s in Germany with the execution of 6 million Jews. The legendary Caribbean thinkers Césaire and Fanon saw this Holocaust rightfully for what it was, as the application of the violence that had been practiced on our ancestors for centuries coming back to Europe, the logical outcome of white supremacy. Unfortunately, the dignity and humanity afforded to the Jews was not and has not today been extended up to today to us. So we have to endure public reverential monuments to those who brutalized and murdered, those who committed genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid against our ancestors. And what is so criminal about this is that we have been conditioned in such a way to accept this as normal. Harriet Tubman described slavery as the next thing to hell. Mary Prince said that she had been a slave herself and that anyone who spoke about loyal slaves was a liar. But until 2021, the only properly constituted space of memory in this country that reflected on slavery, the Lopino Estate, where all our children went for field trips, celebrated the enslavers as illustrious, inviting us to go and pay homage to them at their raised graves on the estate, and described the people they trafficked and worked to death in the space of 6 to 9 years as loyal slaves. This was our reality. I'll just give you a quick side story. You know, even as a revolutionary child, a child of the revolution, when I went to Lopino Estate as a child, my father and our uncles and aunts were very clear that what was taking place there was an injustice. But they lived as Maroons. They didn't feel that it was something that they could tackle at the time. And I felt powerless too, as a child. But I remember my reaction going there when my child had to go there on a field trip. I get there with my son, and the teachers are there taking him, the people from the village, to see these raised graves of these illustrious white people who enslaved our ancestors. And all around these raised graves are buried the most venerable elders of the community, because everybody wanted to be close to Lopino, who loved them so much. I was so disgusted. I have to tell you what I did. And I'm on camera, but it's too bad. I'm going to confess anyway. I said to my son, I said, son, you need to use the bathroom? He said, yes, Dad. I said, how many of you guys need to use the bathroom? 1 or 2, 3, 4 of them put up their hands. I said, come. And we went over to Lopino and his wife's grave. We took out our business and we urinated on them. Now, if any of you in here today feel any revulsion at that action, that is your colonial imagination. The people who enslaved our ancestors do not deserve an ounce of respect from us. None. That is the only appropriate action. And since then, 2016, 2017, I was on the warpath to get rid of that nonsense. And tragically, it took me until 2021 to have that nonsense removed. And despite the fact that we gave the government the names of the people that were enslaved there, we gave them the details of what Lopino actually did, they cannot find it in their resource budgets to put up a proper sign and to turn that thing into a proper place of memory for our people up to today. Right? I don't need a notepad for this section of the essay. All around us, we live in a monument to colonial violence. Port of Spain is a shrine to colonial violence. Right? There is a gentleman, perhaps I didn't need it, by the name of, we don't have much time, so let me just go off what's in my head. One of the gentlemen that I want to bring to your attention today is a man called Ralph Woodford. Woodford is the most celebrated of the colonial governors, and I think he tells the story of what I wanted to say, what I said, the opening statement. Remember my opening statement? I said that the way that history is taught in Trinidad is to minimize the wickedness that was done to our ancestors, to magnify the virtue of Europeans, and to hide structural racism. Remember I said that? Those are the 3 things I want you to look at. I'm going to give you one example and then I'm going to leave you today. So, if you go to the Catholic Cathedral downtown, you go right up to the altar and you turn to the left and you look above the door. There is a huge marble slab that is a monument to Woodford. And it reads, to the memory of Sir Ralph James Woodford Baronet, for 15 years governor and founder of this church, who was born on the 21st of July 1794 and died on the 16th of May 1828. The inhabitants of Trinidad, deeply sensible of the substantial benefits which his long administration of the government conferred upon the colony, and of the irreparable loss which they sustained by his death, have caused this monument to be erected as a lasting memorial of his many public and private virtues, and of their respect and gratitude. Remember what I said? Minimize the harm, maximize the virtue. So let's talk about Woodford's virtues. I'm going to list them out for you now. Remarkably, he was considered racist at a time, by his own peers, at a time when it was okay to own your ancestors. That is how racist Woodford was. He restricted the ownership of land by people of color. We talked about land. He got all government agencies under his regime to work against their interests to the extent that even white fathers who wanted to pass property down to their colored offspring found it damn near impossible. He exhorted whites around him to be severe towards people of color and to disregard whatever little rights they possess. There are stories from this period of colored people, indigenous people, African people being beaten in Port of Spain, because that's the kind of liberty he gave to whites when he was in power. There's a great story of a Roman Catholic priest called Francisco Carrillo, who debauched every woman on his mission in central Trinidad. What we have in Arima, where the Napoleon people live, who call themselves Caribs, is a mission, a Catholic mission. There were about 5 or 6 of them in the country, and the one in central Trinidad was run by Francisco Carrillo. And he interfered with every woman, including grandmothers, on his plantation, it was a plantation. And the men left there in Central and walked to Port of Spain to complain to Woodford about what they experienced. Woodford dispatched a note on horseback to Carrillo, and when they returned, after complaining, thinking that they had been hurt, they were beaten and then sent to work down south so Francisco Carrillo could continue to do what those men in the long black dresses do occasionally, even up to today. Woodford also enforced differential treatment before the courts based on race. He made it harder for free coloreds and blacks to own small businesses by adding rules that did not apply to Europeans, even those born abroad. He enforced explicit segregation of whites and people of color in the pews of churches and in the schools that lasted up until the 1960s in this country. I'm sure there's an old person in this room. My father, when he went to church with his mother and his mother was light-skinned and his father was dark-skinned. And when my father and his brothers went to church with their parents, his mother sat in the front pew, and he and his father and brothers sat in the back of the church. That was the order that Woodford organized. And when I talk about free coloreds and blacks in Woodford's time, those are people who would have looked white today. Most of those people would pass for white today, and they would have to go and sit in back with the enslaved who were allowed to come to church, if they were allowed to come to church. He increased the fees for colored people to get medical care, while at the same time making it harder for those with qualifications to get licenses to practice. As long as he was in power, no colored person could be addressed as Mr. or Mrs. in any government house. He taxed and temporarily broke up the colored literary society. He didn't even want them to read. The litany, and listen, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The litany of hostile actions taken against people of color by this grand white supremacist, I could go on all night. There was a man called Francis de Ritter, the first black or colored Catholic priest in this country. He walked in the finest Christian radical tradition in the Americas, going back to Fray Antonio Montesinos, who preached an impassioned sermon on the Sunday before Christmas in 1511, telling Diego Columbus and the Columbus's sons and brothers that they were going to hell for the way that they treated indigenous people. Like Montesinos, Father Francis de Ritter was persecuted. He died young, 33 years old, on his way back to the Vatican to complain about what Woodford was doing there. I don't know if the Vatican would have helped him, but he felt that that was his only option. Father Francis de Ritter did something absolutely important in our history. He was the first person to set up a desegregated church and a desegregated school in our country. And he did it against the explicit wishes of Woodford and the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church in this country. We are in 2023. He did that in the 1830s. Today, for his sacrifice on our behalf, he has been pushed into oblivion. Nobody in this room here could tell me that before I spoke, they ever heard his name. The school and church that he set up was on Park Street. I want to give all you the details. I don't want you to forget. Where Rosary Boys is now, and Rosary Church is now, that was his land. That was African land that he bought. They never bought the land from him. Years after he died, they reclaimed it and built Rosary Boys and Rosary Church on that sacred spot. They destroyed his memory, and instead they gave us the memory of racist Ralphie. They have us honoring racist Ralphie. He has Woodford Cafe, Woodford Square, established in 1917. He has streets named after him. He has a life-size statue, bigger than Christ, in the Anglican Cathedral. Brother, you say you're Anglican? What are you going to do about that? Marble statue in the Anglican Cathedral, bigger than Christ. This grand white supremacist. And so, what has happened there? They minimized what has happened to us. Every time you see Woodford Square and you pass on Woodford Street or Woodford Cafe advertised on the radio, they are minimizing the violence done to us and our ancestors. They are maximizing the virtue of our colonizers, who were all like Woodford. Woodford was, yes, he was the worst in my opinion, but there was all of them were the same. Those British governors who ruled Trinidad. He just happened to be one of the most vile ones and the most deliberate in his actions, his racist actions against our ancestors, hardening the attitude of whites to blacks in the society up to the present day. Woodford's impact is current. Right? And as I said, Clifton, Abercrombie, all those streets in Woodbrook, Buller Street, all of them named after British generals who were in South Africa during the Boer War, set up the first concentration camps in the 20th century. Churchill, who committed crimes in Africa, crimes in Asia, crimes in the Middle East. One of the unsung mass murderers in the 20th century. Everywhere you turn in this country, some vile monster we have to honor. Somebody who did something wicked to our ancestors. The time for that is now. The time for reckoning has arrived, and we will not continue to live under this regime. I remember, and I'm going to close with this statement, the great British author and journalist Afua Hirsch came down here in 2018, and I met her to do an interview in Woodford Square, and she stood there silent, and she said, "I can't believe that in a country that was founded on genocide and slavery, that the people who committed those acts are honored and celebrated in your public spaces." She said that there will come a time when that is unacceptable. That time is now. Thank you very much.
All right, so give it up again for Mr. Chewbacca Cambon and his contribution this evening. And rounding up the presentation this evening, we have none other on southern soil in San Fernando. Not giving anything less to the other two speakers. Their contribution was phenomenal and very important. But put your hands together and welcome to the microphone, Brother David Mohammed.
Doctor.
Thank you very much. I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I bear witness that there is but one God. I greet you in the greeting words of peace of Assalamu Alaikum, which simply means peace be unto you. And I'd like to thank Brother Keon Francis for his presentation, and of course my beloved brother and friend Brother Shabaka Kambon for a brilliant, thought-provoking discourse. And Brother Shabaka has rattled the auditorium with that information. I'm just here to clean it up. So I'm not going to be very long, but I just want to make a few points on this great occasion. And this year the theme for emancipation was centered around creating opportunities and maximizing potential. So clearly for a topic like that, we have to think about our youth. For a subject like that, we must think about our young people. And we have to ensure that we can connect them to the consciousness, the philosophies, and the ideologies that brought empowerment to our people from those who went before. But you and I could take that up as a mission, but if it is not incorporated in the school system, then we have a serious problem. There is no other people who do not place on their educational curriculum and syllabus the necessary information that is needed to inspire their children. We, on the other hand, before we put any information on our children's educational curriculum and syllabus, we first consider how much other people will be offended by us learning the information and truth about ourselves. So before we teach black history to black children, we first have to find out if Chinese will feel offended, if whites will feel offended, if Indians will feel offended, and in this society in particular, if Syrians will feel offended. And if there's any indication whatsoever that they will not be comfortable with you and I teaching the truth to our babies, then they will abort and abandon that curriculum. And we have to think about this, beloved. And I want you to understand something else. If we're talking about creating opportunities for our youth, then there's this narrative in this society. Now, you could do a survey yourself, beloved. And I can put a challenge to each of us. Go and ask the average person. Now, don't feel uncomfortable with what I'm saying. Please, and don't judge what I'm saying in advance. Think, please. And let's walk through this. You can go and ask the average African person. Think about what I'm saying. Don't jump to conclusions before I finish saying it. Please. You can ask the average African person, how did the Syrians get rich? I'm not talking about the drug trade today. That's not what I'm talking about. But you go and ask that question. How did the Chinese get rich? How? How did the East Indians get rich? You ask the average black person that question, and they will repeat this recycled cliche. No, in particular, in fact, forget about the average black person. Go and ask the average black politician that question. And I'm certain that all of them, especially if they're currently in power, they will say the same thing to you. And you know what they'll say? They'll say, they worked hard. Okay, I'm taking that. Go and ask any African politician, how did other races get rich? And they will say to you, They worked hard. Okay. So the subtle suggestion is, but if you work hard too, then you could also be wealthy and successful. All right, so here's my question. Who works harder than that poor African person who lives in the ghetto, who gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, prepares meals for their children, irons school uniforms, leaves home by 5 o'clock in the morning to get to a job for 6 o'clock in the morning, and work all day long for minimum wage and finish at 5 o'clock in the evening with not enough money to survive, but they get home at 6 o'clock and either go and drive taxi, bake bread to sell, go online with some new kind of scheme to make money, or even leave the home to work again and then come back at 11 o'clock in the night. They're in bed by 12 o'clock in the night, and then they get back up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get their children ready for school. Who works harder than them? But you ask that person, that same person who just got up at 4, got the children ready for 5, left home at 6 to get to work for 7, and work all day, 2 jobs, almost up to midnight. You go and ask that African person, how did the Syrians get rich? And you know what they'll tell you? Oh, but they work hard. You mean they work harder than you? So the next logical question is, how come you working harder than everybody else, but you're still so poor? And the answer to that lies in this statement, this oxymoron, the working poor. How can you be working and poor at the same time unless the person that you're working for is robbing you? You can be working and poor. If you're not working, but then maybe you might get poor eventually. But you're working and working all day long and still poor? Now, something's wrong with that picture. So you know what's required here, beloved? Our unity. Listen, our unity, black unity, African unity through black power is so powerful because our unity has more value than their money. But they divide and rule us with their money and make an objective and a priority for their economic success our division. Because the day that we unite, pool our resources, form skills banks and think tanks, settle our differences and come together, it is all over for the oppressor. If all praises be to Allah. Beloved, think. Let's do some basic logic. Think. So there's poverty in the ghetto. And in the ghetto we live in food deserts. A food desert is a place where there is a shortage of food being grown. There's a shortage of freshly grown food being made available. And we normally have to travel long distances to get groceries in abundance at a reasonable price, but we're surrounded by visual images from long distances of fast food death, where they target our children. Your children love Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and Iron Man and the Avengers and Hulk. So they put Batman and Superman and Iron Man and the Avengers and Hulk on the KFC box. So you gravitated towards the superheroes and then you buying that for your children. They roping you in like a fishing net. And all of that death. Kentucky. Murder King. Taco Hell. Just death. Listen. If 1,000 poor people grow $1,000 worth of food. In the poorest community, that is $1 million in added food security in 1 year. 1,000 poor people in a year growing $1,000 worth of food. $1 million in added food security, which is $1 million less in petty street crimes and robberies. $1 million in food security in a concept that we don't even embrace because we don't put food and security in the same sentence. Even though after World War II, Churchill was telling his people, we need to grow victory gardens. We don't put the word victory and garden in the same sentence. But all of these solutions are right there in front of us. And we're the only people, again, who, when we talk about our unity, it is called racism. Brother Shabaka Kamban gave us some mind-blowing information about how we uphold our oppressors. But did you know that it's a criminal offense in 17 countries around the world to deny the Jewish Holocaust? And when we say denial of the Jewish Holocaust, we don't mean to say that it did not exist. Denial of the Jewish Holocaust is based on three factors. One, to say that it was less than 6 million people who were killed. Two, to claim that the objective of the Holocaust was not mass extermination, but deportation. And three, to imply, this one has a whole long history behind it. If you imply or suggest that gas chambers were not used in the extermination process, any of those three, you are a criminal. That could just be your opinion. And you are a criminal and you can go to jail in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Hungary, Greece, of course, Israel. But meanwhile, we live in a society where they're denying the African Holocaust, which was the worst crimes against humanity ever. And for those of us who may have forgotten, we are still in the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent, which began on January 1st, 2015 and ends on December 31st, 2024. What year are we in again? We're in 2023? Can't be. Could never be. Listen, do you know that right now there are politicians in the British Parliament overseas who are calling for reparations for the Caribbean? David Lammy, he's the member of Parliament for Tottenham in England, been calling for reparations in the British Parliament. Diane Abbott, member of first black woman elected as a member of Parliament in England, they just suspended her. You know what they suspended her for? Because she said that Jews don't suffer the same kind of racism as Africans. What's so offensive about that statement? She was suspended as a sitting member of Parliament for expressing that opinion. You have Clive Lewis, Anadia Witomi, who just a couple months back called on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to enter into discussions with Caribbean leaders to discuss reparations. All right, just in the last 2 years, listen, you have this whole avalanche of responses, starting with the University of Scotland. In 2019, University of Scotland in Glasgow, they did their own research on how they became wealthy, on the investors in that educational institution, and based on them studying their own history, they came to the conclusion, okay, we as a university became a multi-million-dollar educational institution from slavery. The University of Glasgow in Scotland announced that they're going to give 20 million British pounds in reparations for slavery. Then you had the Digicel phone company. Let me see how many of you have a Digicel phone, the Digicel SIM card. No one here has a Digicel SIM card? But all of a sudden, you want to wait till what I have to say first about Digicel? No, don't feel bad. You'll feel good after what I have to say. The bigger, better network. Digicel's CEO, owner, Dennis O'Brien, announced in July 2022, last year, that Digicel is going to launch something called the Repair Campaign, where they are going to meet with, and this is the hard part, leaders of Caribbean governments to discuss Digicel paying reparations to African people. Then you have, because what Big Mobile doing? Just cutting if you don't pay on time, bad service, driving, what's that, labor? What's that? Late fees? Yeah, and getting a blind. How much blind they giving now? Started off with $5. Now you pay your whole monthly bill. And you still disconnect because the whole bill was a blind. Just suffering under the mobile. But Digicel, Digicel reparations. Then you have a member of parliament in England, white man. He's the member of parliament right now for South Dorset. His name is Richard Drax. Richard Drax was invited to Barbados by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, our brother CARICOM Chairman David Commission, and Member of Parliament Trevor Prescott, to discuss his family paying reparations to Barbados, because again, they did the research, they studied and found out that he and his family made millions of pounds off enslavement in Barbados, just like the Trevelyan family, another English family, who on February 27th this year went to Grenada, met with government officials and handed over £100,000 as a symbolic reparations payment. Then in January this year, the head of the Anglican Church, the Anglican brother left, the head of the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury, his name is Justin Welby, he announced that the Anglican Church or the Church of England will be paying 100 million British pounds because they recognize their role in the slave trade. Around the same time, Lloyds Bank of London in January this year, 2023, announced that they will be engaging in a reparations research project to pay reparations to African people. The Independent newspaper did a front page editorial about their own research on themselves as an institution and how much money their family made from enslavement. And it was after this that on April the 6th, again, this year, that King Charles announced, after being under heavy pressure, that they will launch another research project to see exactly how much the British royal family owes African people for reparations. And he said, King Charles said, that they're going to do this research project for 3 years. All we have to do is mail him a copy of Dr. Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, and he could read it in 3 hours. But he said he's going to take 3 years. Now, why do you think, with all the information that's already out there, Brother Shabaka Kamban can email his presentation to King Charles, and King Charles can read it and say, all right, reparations due. And did you know that last week in Jamaica, at the University of the West Indies, Justice Patrick Jackson and others, a team of researchers, did a calculation and determined that it's 107 trillion US dollars that is owed by the different European countries for reparations. But here why, and this is my personal theory, that I think King Charles said they're going to take 3 years to study this. Because I believe that he is going to take 3 years to monitor and measure our responses. Because if you have all of those members of parliament over there in the United Kingdom who are talking about reparations in the British Parliament, King Charles will say, we ain't going to pay reparations just like that. What are they talking about in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Antigua, in Dominica, in St. Vincent, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, in Guyana, in Grenada, in the Bahamas, in Bermuda? What are they talking about in the parliaments there? So if in the British Parliament they're talking about reparations, but in the Caribbean parliaments they're not, do you think King Charles is going to pay a penny? No. And 3 years later he's going to come and say, well, these people aren't interested. In fact, King Charles is probably looking at the TV6 news right now and say, let me see how interested they are in their own struggle. King Charles probably sitting there on his throne. Who's Folly? whose voice was it on these text messages and voice notes? What's the THA? What's Bacchanal? Because that's all they're talking about. They ain't talking about the reparations. They only talking about Bacchanal. Sir, the black consultant, come here. Tell me, what is Bacchanal? Why do you want to know, Your Highness? Because I'm listening to their parliament to see if they're talking about reparations, but they're only talking about this Bacchanal. What is it? And he's taking a full, and he'll take the full 3 years to monitor that. This is why we have to lead that charge from a grassroots level. We have to launch aggressively justice for our ancestors. And we have to put that consciousness in the minds of the children. Up to this morning at the Kwame Ture Center, we were asking the little children, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, every Saturday morning we have our Boys Academy. And we asked them, what is 10 multiplied by 10? They said 100. What's 10 multiplied by 100? Said 1,000. What is 1,000 multiplied by 1,000? They said 1,000,000. What is 1,000 multiplied by 1,000,000? A few said 1,000,000,000. Then we said, well, what is 1,000 multiplied by 1,000,000,000? Just 1 or 2 children said 1,000,000,000,000. I said, okay, this is how much we are owed by those who kidnapped, murdered, enslaved, tortured, beat, lynched, raped, and oppressed African people. This is a fraction of what they owe. You, young people, have to become part of a struggle for justice and not let anyone silence your voice or remove your sensitivity for liberation. We are depending on you all to make the right choices and the right decisions for the next generation. None of us will be here to solve all of the problems of our people, but they will be. But we have to put the consciousness in them, beloved. And that's real African unity. All praises be to Allah. So, I conclude with this. I'm going to share with you a short story that illustrates the importance and the power of our unity. This is a short story about a lady named Jenny who owned a small hotel. And one day, a tourist came to the hotel and said to Jenny, I would like to stay here for one night. But before I stay here for one night, I'd like to see the rooms first. And Jenny told the tourist, fine, no problem. She called her assistant to show the tourist the rooms, and the tourist took $1,000 and placed it down on the table. The tourist puts the money down there. He goes upstairs with the assistant. Jenny picks up that $1,000 and takes it to her mechanic. Because Jenny's car had to be repaired the week before. The mechanic fixed it. She didn't get to pay him as yet. So now Jenny paid off the mechanic that $1,000. The mechanic took that $1,000 and took it right away to an electrician. Because the mechanic's home needed rewiring the week before. The electrician came, did the job, but the mechanic didn't get to pay the electrician, so the mechanic paid off the debt and the electrician got his $1,000. The electrician took that same $1,000 to the plumber because the pipes had burst in the electrician's house the week before. The plumber came and fixed it, but didn't get to pay the plumbers yet, so the electrician now has $1,000 which he owed the plumber. He pays off the plumber. The plumber took that same $1,000 and went and paid a caterer because the plumber had gotten married the week before and he didn't get to pay the wedding planner as yet. Took the same $1,000 and paid off the wedding planner. The wedding planner took that same $1,000 and took it right back to Jenny because the plumber got married at Jenny's hotel. And the caterer rented the venue from Jenny for $1,000, didn't get to pay yet, had the $1,000 in hand, went right back around to Jenny. The caterer pays Jenny. Jenny takes the same $1,000 and puts it right back on the table where the tourist left it. At the same time, the tourist comes back downstairs with the assistant and says to Jenny, I am sorry, but I will not be staying in your hotel tonight, but thank you for your time. He picks up his $1,000 and leaves with it. Now, $5,000 was just spent. Question, where is the money? Now, if you are saying that we cannot open business because we don't have money, I have just proven to you that we can open up a skills bank cooperative with a plumber, a mason, a mechanic, an electrician, and if any of them want to get married, a caterer as well. It is the human resource that has the value in it, not the paper cash. But if we have an ideology that is saying this one is Rasta, this one is Muslim, this one is PNM, this one is UNC, this one is a trade unionist, this one is a nationalist, this one is a Pan-Africanist, this one is a Hindu, yeah, African Hindus these days, this one is a Buddhist, this one is a Jew or Hebrew. And we all find all of the reasons not to unite with each other while we ignore the necessity to unite with one another. That divide and rule, divide and conquer, Willie Lynch syndrome trick, that is like a bad seed that has been planted in our heads, that has bred self-hatred in us for one another. That is our greatest enemy. And so, beloved, this is how we built the Kwame Ture Center. We acquired 3/4 of an acre of land from the state. And on that 3/4 of an acre, we constructed a 6,000 square foot building without not even 1 cent from the government, from any major business corporations. All we did was settle our differences. And I never used to say it as much back then, but I'm starting to say it now. When we started building, a man drove up in a car and he stopped by the front and he told our painter, he said, these men have to be mad to be Muslims and to come and build this building in the middle of Rasta City. That's what they said 8 years ago. 8 years ago. They said we had to be crazy as Muslims in the middle of a gang warfare to build a center right in the heart of Rastas who were killing Muslims under those names and labels. But we believe in the power of African unity more than they believe in the impact of the self-hatred that our slave masters induced on us. We believe more in our togetherness than they believe in our division. We believe more in our oneness as a people. And all of us as African people, as the Bible says in the book of Genesis, God made man in his own image and likeness. This means that the first human being on earth was in the image and likeness of God. And biology shows, history shows, science shows, genetics shows, all realms of study and science from geology, geography, anthropology, and archaeology all show that African people were the first human beings on earth, and that is what connects us. Not any of the labels or brands or badges that an enemy put on us. Your enemy branded you something like a farmer brands cattle, and then you want to identify with the brand of your enemy more than you want to identify with the oneness of us as a people. That's a mental sickness, beloved. And my leader and teacher, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, said, to get into this work, we have to love black people more than we have been made to hate ourselves, because our enemies did a job on us, and that self-hatred has been intergenerational. But it's a curse that must be broken, and that can be broken, and especially with our youth and the consciousness that we can instill within them. That is the positivity of our future. So, beloved family, I'd like to thank you. Be patient with me. Thank you for listening. And may Almighty God continue to bless you. I greet you in peace. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much to all our lecturers and speakers this evening. We want to say a special thank you to Keon Francis. Please give it up to Keon Francis, first speaker. Second speaker this evening was Shabaka Kambon. Give it up to him in terms of his contributions. And last but certainly not least, Brother David Mohammed and his wisdom and information that shared this evening. Just to give you a house announcement that we will be having another lecture series tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have the presence of Ms. Pearl Utu Springer. She's also going to be here to do in the lecture series, and two other speakers tomorrow. So we have that, and also another fashion component as well tomorrow. So we are getting ready now to bring on the fashion component this evening. You ready to see some fashion, ladies and gentlemen? Now they didn't hear you all. They didn't wait in a while. You ready for the fashion? Yeah. All right. So the ladies, I want to make you all to make some noise for these amazing stars who are coming on first this evening. Amazing stars. You know, they're shining bright. Really amazing stars. You know, as we started sorting out the music as persons, I know some of the parents are getting ready to take their seats, to get their cameras out. You know, they want to get their children the best way they know how in terms of that. And without any further ado, we want to say our first piece, capsule collection, is going to be done by Halux, which is a Ghanaian designer from Ghana. And that is Josephine. So give it up for Josephine. And again, she has a booth here on my left. She's also going to be here tomorrow in terms of a plethora of different types of looks and information on her worthy assistant who is here to assist in many ways in terms of the information and the pieces you see this evening. So with any further ado, we bring up the music and we start the fashion capsule.
I will never leave your side.
coming from? Where you from?
We really do better than that. Throw them around the floor. Give them some support. These pieces are Clifton Caleb design. As we continue. Keep your hands going, keep your hands going, give them that support. And here they all come down. As they all come down, courtesy Hollis design. And we continue with the designer Hollis design in the adult category. Here with the kids.
If you keep me out, then I promise you that I will never bring you down. Even for the best time, I'm so proud of you. I'm your body, then I like you. You know me, open up to your own door. I'm the abortion, you like Panadol. You think you're my brother, I say when I see your bum bum. I'm the abortion, you like Panadol. If you're my brother, let me get strong. Come, come, come. Come, 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 come. Don't let me get wrong, come, come, come. Let me get strong. Come, 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 come.
One person,
Give it up for them in their final finale. The kids on the runway. Give it up for Hey Looks and also operations manager working with the collector this evening. Alright, so want to give it up again and again. Don't forget the booths are available. We will be moving into day 2 of the festival tomorrow, starting from 10 a.m. 10 a.m. tomorrow, the booths will be out tomorrow, so you can come and patronize, have a look at what the booth has, some of their creative, amazing talent, some of their beautiful, beautiful work right there in San Fernando. I want to say a special thank you to the organizers, the national body of the Emancipation Support Committee in terms of having this experience in San Fernando. I want to say give it up to you, our wonderful audience this evening, just singing your palms, making some noise as we get ready for the second designer coming on the run. This designer is based in New York, but she has homegrown roots right here in Trinidad and Tobago. So as we get ready to bring on our first designer, our second designer, let's get ready, put your hands together for the second design on the inside, presenting to you with her selection, tail of the shirt, presenting to you Donna Dove. As we continue with the run. You're looking with the designer Donna Dove with her collection called The Tail of the Shirt.
you do waka waka. Left or right, you could be waka. Instagram, don't finish data. Big English, me I'm a fool waka. My head, my neck, my whip. Oh, I still wanna. My head, my neck, my whip. Oh, I still wanna. My head, my neck, my whip. Oh, I still wanna.
Any money where I get, I dey flex, I dey go, the best, I dey show. She see fly go on the jet, I baby my bed, she not to start. See back, see the yarn, free pass, see the that, she do wine and will when she should start.
All right, so that was the collection from Donna Dog. So put your hands together as we introduce to you the designer, Donna Dog.
If I hush puppy, she go feel the dash. If I hide the money, she go see the cash. Bend down well, when you see the cash. Cash, 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 cash. Bend down well, when you see the cash.
So we continue with the runway. Next designer coming out is DADL. As we continue.
She do wine and will when she should start. Continuing with DADL.
American boys from there. Outside slow friends, only bumps over there. Roof steps over there. Brick boys over there. Chuck D's over there. Why stay over there? Outside the Kentucky. Other than that, to make kids come back. All the hour, let's come play with us. Why? Yeah!
So give it up one more time for brand label DADL. Once again, give it up for brand label DADL as we continue with the fashion run. Coming in from Tobago, Euphoric Design. Put your hands together as we bring on capsule designer, Euphoric Design. We continue with our Tobago designers on the inside, euphoric design.
Bring me back for me. Back. Yeah, please. Yeah, just leave it.
Mapenzi si wazi la pesa, ukijiona mzuri waseka, kudadeki sitaki kulesha, one na kuuma. Pole, pole, hela zangu, sio zako. Pole, pole, usiniacha. Pole, pole, sasa. Pole, pole.
So put your hands together and give the love to our sister aisle designer, Euphoric Designs out of Tobago. Once again, this is our first installment, first day of the South Trinidad Emancipation Festival Village. We open tomorrow from 10 a.m. as we showcase all the creativity, all the talent, all the food and the excitement, the lecture series happening right here on the inside from 10 a.m. tomorrow, all day to meet the vendors and the creative as we celebrate our emancipation celebrations from 2023. On behalf of the organizers and the committee, we say thank you so very much for coming out, and do enjoy the rest of the evening as you look and visit some of the booths on your way out. Have a safe evening and have a good night.
It's like a taxi, man, so